She looked me dead in the eyes, her own father-in-law, and coldly said in front of a room full of strangers, "We don't serve people from the gutter here." Not a second of hesitation, not a shred of respect. At that moment, I had only $43 in my wallet. But the heaviest thing I carried that day wasn't money. It was a lifetime of silence and swallowed pride. The entire bank fell silent. A few people looked away. A few others let out quiet laughs. And she just stood there, calmly adjusting the sleeve of her blazer, as if she had just brushed dirt off her polished shoes. In her eyes, the man standing in front of her was nothing more than a poor old man in a faded jacket, dust-covered work boots, and trembling hands worn down by age. A man with nothing left except old age and worn-out dignity. And, honestly, until that very moment, even I didn't know what I was about to do next. But then I looked straight at her, and I understood. It was finally time for her to learn the truth. My name is Arthur. I'm 67 years old, and I've lived in Detroit my whole life, East Side, the kind of neighborhood where people still know their neighbors' names and leave casseroles on porches when somebody gets sick. I worked 31 years at a tool and die shop out in Sterling Heights, came home every night with grease under my fingernails, and I wouldn't trade one of those days for anything. I've been banking at Meridian Community Trust on Gratiot Avenue since before my son could walk, 24 years. And on a cold Wednesday morning in November, my own daughter-in-law, the branch manager of that very bank, used her position to remind me of exactly what she thought I was worth. So let me take you back to that Wednesday morning. I drove to the bank in my '99 Silverado, same as I always do. The truck's faded red, got a small dent on the rear panel from a parking lot incident about 6 years back. And the heater only works on the passenger side if you angle the vents just right. I've been meaning to fix that, but she runs, and she's mine, and that's always been enough for me. I parked in the lot and walked in wearing what I always wear: canvas, work pants, a Carhartt jacket, steel-toed boots that have probably walked 100,000 miles between them. My late wife Dorothy used to say those boots were the most honest things I owned. I think she meant that as a compliment. I needed to withdraw some cash. Nothing dramatic. Enough to cover groceries, a prescription refill, and a visit to my barber, Wendell, who still cuts hair out of his basement on Van Dyke and charges $15 because he says that's what a haircut costs if you're not paying for marble floors and a receptionist. I got in line behind a young woman with a stroller and an older gentleman who kept patting his coat pocket like he was worried he'd forgotten something. Normal Wednesday, normal bank, except behind the manager's desk, with her reading glasses on and her dark blazer pressed like she was expecting a board meeting, sat my daughter-in-law, Camille. Camille is 38. She married my son Marcus 6 years ago. At a ceremony I helped pay for that cost more than my first house. She's sharp, organized, and genuinely good at her job. Those things are all true, and I want you to hold on to that because this story gets complicated if you let it get simple. When she glanced up and saw me standing in line, something passed across her face. Not warmth, not recognition, something closer to recalibration, like she was deciding what to do with me. Then she looked back down at her papers. I told myself she was busy. I'm good at telling myself things like that. When I got to the window, the teller, a young man named, according to his nameplate, Trevor, couldn't have been more than 23, looked at my ID with the specific brand of boredom that comes from a job that involves looking at IDs all day. He typed for a moment, frowned slightly, typed again. Then he said he needed a manager to approve the transaction. For $43. I've been a customer here for almost a quarter century. I asked why. He said it was policy for accounts flagged for inactivity review. I didn't know what that meant, but before I could ask, he was already calling out to Camille's desk. She walked over slowly. I noticed, and I noticed myself noticing, that she didn't look at me when she spoke. She looked at Trevor. She talked about me the way you talk about a piece of furniture that's been left in the wrong room. There was a small, practiced pause, and then she said it. Her voice was not particularly loud, but the bank was quiet enough. We don't accommodate that kind of walk-in traffic here, Trevor. This looks like a situation for the check-cashing center on Harper. Then she finally looked at me, and she said, Arthur, I think you'd be more comfortable somewhere else. The room did not gasp. That's the thing nobody tells you about public humiliation. It doesn't come with a dramatic soundtrack. It comes with a few turned heads, a half-stifled cough from somewhere behind you, and the sound of your own breathing suddenly feeling very loud. I was standing at a teller window in the bank I've trusted with my finances for 24 years, and my son's wife had just suggested, in front of a room full of strangers, that I wasn't welcome there. I didn't say anything. I put my wallet back in my inside pocket. I thanked Trevor, he deserved that, He looked mortified and I walked to the door. Each step felt deliberate in a way I couldn't explain. Not performance, just intention. Like something had clicked into place. I sat in my truck for a few minutes before starting the engine. The cold came through the vents, even with the heat on. I watched people walk by on Gratiot, heads down against the wind, going about their Wednesday like nothing had happened, because for them nothing had. But for me, something had finally clarified. Not anger, exactly. Anger I would have recognized. This was something older and quieter. See, I need to tell you something about my life that I've never particularly advertised. I'm not a show-off. That's not a humble brag, it's genuinely a core operating principle. My father worked the line at Ford River Rouge for 30 years and came home every night proud. He taught me that real security is invisible. The money people see, he used to say, is the money that's already gone. I took that seriously, deadly seriously. As it turns out, I bought my first rental property in 1984, a duplex over on Chalmers, in a neighborhood that most people were selling out of at the time. I saw what was coming. Detroit has always rewarded the people who believed in it when nobody else did. I put every spare dollar into that duplex, refinanced it 3 years later, used the equity to buy 2 more buildings, and kept going. I lived on Dorothy's teacher's salary and my shop wages, and we put everything else to work. We didn't take vacations to the Caribbean. We went up to the Upper Peninsula and camped. We didn't drive luxury cars. We drove reliable ones and kept them a long time. We cooked dinner at home 6 nights a week, and the 7th we went to this Lebanese place on Michigan Avenue that Dorothy loved. By the time I retired, I had 47 rental units across Wayne and Macomb counties, a commercial property in Ferndale that houses 3 small businesses, a stock portfolio I had been building since my late 30s, and a private savings balance that would surprise most people who've ever shaken my hand. None of it was secret, exactly. It just wasn't announced. I never felt the need. Camille didn't know any of that. I'm fairly certain of it. Or rather, she thought she knew. She'd glanced at what she could see and drawn her conclusions. That's the thing about judgments made from appearances. They feel complete to the person making them. I drove home, made coffee, and sat at my kitchen table for a long time. Then I went to the room I use as an office, a spare bedroom with a second-hand desk and a filing cabinet that's been with me longer than Marcus has been alive, and I opened the drawer where I keep the documents. Not all of them, just enough to remind myself of what 28 years of patience actually looks like on paper. I wasn't planning revenge. I want to be precise about that. What I was planning felt more like a correction. Camille had made a statement, publicly, about who I was and what I was worth. I was going to let her finish that thought to its natural conclusion. 3 days later, I put on the same Carhartt jacket, same boots, same canvas pants. I drove back to Meridian Community Trust at 10:15 inches the morning, walked in, and took my place in line. Camille was at her desk. She saw me. Her expression did something complicated that I filed away for later. When I got to the window, a different teller this time. A woman in her 40s with reading glasses on a beaded chain. I told her I needed to make an internal transfer. She asked how much. I told her $280,000. She blinked. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. I watched the news travel across the room like weather. Trevor glanced up from his station. A loan officer in a glass cubicle along the wall turned toward the window. Camille's phone call ended. She stood up, and this time she walked over quickly. "Mr. Beaumont," she said, using my last name in a way she hadn't used in 6 years of Thanksgiving dinners. "Can I assist you personally with this transaction?" Her voice was professional. Her hands were not entirely steady. I told her the transfer could be processed right here at the window. No need to go anywhere special. What followed was 6 of the most quietly satisfying minutes of my adult life. I watched Camille verify my account information, re-verify it, confirm my identity, and stand very still while the numbers populated on the screen. I watched her understand in real time, while I was looking at her, that she had constructed an entire portrait of a person from a thumbnail. I didn't smirk. I didn't say anything pointed. I just waited for my transfer confirmation, thanked the teller, and told Camille it had been a pleasure. I meant it to land like a stone dropped into still water. I think it did. Now here's where I have to be honest with you again, because this is the part that changes the whole story. I had a lawyer. His name is George Whitfield, and he's been handling my estate planning and property transactions for going on 20 years. 2 days after my first bank visit, I called George and told him what had happened. Not because I wanted to sue anybody, because something he said 2 years ago had been nagging at me. Something about how bank employees with family access could, if they were inclined, view customer records in ways that crossed legal lines. I asked him to find out if Camille had ever looked at my accounts when she had no business reason to do so. He called me back on a Friday evening. She had. Not once, not twice, 41 times in 19 months. She'd been checking my checking account balance, my transaction history, my loan inquiries, and not just mine. George's contact at the State Banking Commission pulled a broader picture. She'd also run records on my cousin Barbara, on my nephew Darnell, on Dorothy's older sister Ruth Ann, who's 74 years old and lives in a senior apartment on the west side. She'd been building a map of our entire family's financial picture, illegally, using the access her job gave her, and based on what she saw in my daily use account, the modest one I use for groceries and the barber and small cash needs, she had concluded that I was a man of limited means, and she had shared that conclusion with people in our family in ways I was only beginning to understand. I sat with that for a long time, because here's what I started to piece together. In the past 2 years, my cousin Barbara had offered, twice, to help me with my situation. I hadn't understood what situation she meant. My nephew Darnell had invited me to some kind of financial literacy seminar, very gently, very kindly, like it was something I needed. Dorothy's sister Ruth Ann had pulled Marcus aside at Christmas. I found this out later and told him that somebody in the family should check whether I was managing my affairs properly. These people love me. They weren't gossiping to be cruel. They were responding to information they'd been given. Information that painted me as an aging widower quietly struggling, too proud to ask for help. Camille had not done this with malice toward them. In her mind, I think she genuinely believed she was assessing the situation, gathering intelligence, being the capable and informed person in the room. She needed to know where everyone stood financially. That kind of information is power, and power is what made her feel safe in a world where she was always performing competence for someone. Understanding that, really understanding it, made what I had to do next feel less like punishment and more like a long overdue conversation. The Tuesday after my second bank visit, Marcus called. He sounded tight, like he was trying to hold his voice at a specific register. He asked me to come over that evening. He said Camille would be home by 7. I knew exactly what had happened. The day before, I had transferred $3.9 million from my primary investment account into that small checking account Camille had been watching. George had assured me that a deposit of that size would trigger automatic internal alerts system-wide. She would have known within the hour. I drove to their condo in Midtown, a nice building, doorman, granite countertops, monthly rent that I happen to know is more than most people's mortgages, and I rode the elevator up to the 8th floor. Marcus opened the door. He looked like a man who had been asked a question he didn't have an answer to. Camille was on the couch in her work clothes, her usual precision somewhat undone. The posture was different. Something had been knocked loose. I sat in the chair across from her. She started by telling me there must have been some error with my account. A large deposit, possibly a fraud attempt, had flagged their system. She was concerned. She wanted to help. Her voice was the voice of someone buying time. Marcus sat beside her and said, "Dad, is someone trying to use your account? Is something wrong?" I reached into my coat pocket and set a small recorder on the coffee table. I told them I'd started carrying it after my first visit to the bank. "For my own protection," I said. And then I pressed play, and Camille's voice came out of that small device and filled their living room like smoke filling a room. The silence after I stopped the recording was the loudest thing I've ever heard. Marcus turned to look at his wife with an expression I recognized from when he was 9 years old and had done something he knew was wrong and was waiting to see if I'd already figured it out. He had, and he knew I had, and the three of us sat in that silence while the fact of what his wife had said to his father in a room full of strangers became real to him for the first time. She started explaining about professional standards, about appearances, about how my showing up at her branch made things difficult for her. I let her finish. Then I put the folder George had prepared on the table. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I told them about the 41 access records, the unauthorized credit inquiries, Barbara's records, Darnell's, Ruth Ann's. I told them about every family conversation I'd traced back to information Camille shouldn't have had. I told them, calmly, that this was a federal violation, and that my attorney was prepared to cooperate fully with an investigation. Camille's hands were shaking. Marcus was reading through the documents without speaking. Then I told them what my actual financial picture looked like. Not every detail, that wasn't the point, but enough. Enough for them to understand what 19 months of monitoring a single checking account had told Camille, and what she'd missed entirely. I watched Camille's face move through several things in quick succession. Disbelief, recalculation, something close to grief. Not for me. I don't think. For the story she'd been telling herself, the one where she was the sophisticated one, the one who understood how money worked, the one who'd married into less than she deserved and was quietly making the best of it. I stood up to leave, and Marcus asked me what happened now. I told him that was his question to answer, not mine. That was 8 months ago. Camille resigned from Meridian Community Trust 2 weeks after that evening. The federal inquiry, which George set in motion, uncovered a pattern of unauthorized access affecting not just my family but other customers, people who had no idea someone had been quietly mapping their financial lives for reasons that had nothing to do with banking. She entered a plea agreement. She cannot work in financial services again. I don't take pleasure in that. I really don't. Because somewhere in all of this is a person who was afraid, who learned early that security meant knowing more than everyone else in the room, who turned that fear into something corrosive without ever really stopping to examine what she was becoming. Marcus asked me to have breakfast with him 3 weeks after everything came out. He showed up at my house at 8 in the morning, and I made eggs and toast, and we sat at the same kitchen table where I helped him with his algebra homework. And he talked for a long time. Not to explain Camille, he wasn't defending her. He was trying to understand how far he'd drifted from himself without noticing. He talked about conversations where she'd gently redirected his attention, planted doubts, reframed his father from a source of wisdom into a project that needed managing. He said, "I stopped seeing you and started seeing her version of you. And I don't know exactly when that happened." We talked for 3 hours that morning. About Dorothy, about the duplex on Chalmers that started everything, about his grandfather and the Ford River Rouge plant, and what it means to build something with your hands and your patience, and leave it for the people who come after you. About how real wealth is quiet by nature, because it isn't performing for anyone. Marcus filed for divorce in February. He's living in a smaller apartment now, in Hamtramck, and he seems lighter in a way I hadn't seen in years. He's been coming by on Sunday afternoons. We've been working on refinishing the floors in my upstairs hallway, a project I started about 4 years ago and kept putting off. There's something about doing a physical thing side by side with your son that repairs things that words can't reach. I ran into Camille once, at a gas station on Jefferson. She saw me from across the lot, and for a moment neither of us moved. Then she walked over. She said she knew no apology was going to cover what had happened. I said that was probably right. She said she'd been thinking about why she did what she did, and she was starting to understand that she had spent her whole adult life confusing visibility with value, that she'd never learned how to feel secure without having something to show for it. It was the most honest thing I'd ever heard her say. I told her I hoped she figured it out. I meant that. Here's what I know now that I didn't fully articulate before any of this happened. The way you dress, the car you drive, the neighborhood you live in, none of that is who you are. But more than that, the people who need to assess your worth by those signals are telling you something important about themselves, not about you. Camille didn't humiliate me because she was powerful. She humiliated me because she was frightened. And frightened people reach for whatever makes them feel tall. The mistake most people make is responding to that kind of humiliation by trying to prove themselves in the language the other person understands. Flash the money, wear the right thing, perform the right version of success. I understand that impulse. I felt it, briefly, that first morning in the parking lot, but I've lived long enough to know that once you start performing your worth for someone who's already decided not to see it, you've already lost something more important than the argument. What I keep thinking about, what this whole experience clarified for me, is something my father told me when I was about 22 and had just been passed over for a promotion by a foreman who'd given it to a younger man with less experience and a better handshake. My father said, "Arthur, the people who underestimate you are doing you a favor they don't know they're doing. Let them keep doing it." I've let them keep doing it for 40 years, and I'm here to tell you, it works. If you've ever walked into a room and watched someone's eyes move past you to find someone more worth talking to, if you've ever been the person who got the shorter explanation, the faster brush off, the barely disguised impatience, then you know exactly what that Wednesday morning in the bank felt like. And if you've ever had to swallow that feeling and keep walking, I want you to know that what you do with it afterward is the whole story. The humiliation is just the opening. Here's what I want to leave you with, and I want you to sit with this question for real. Who in your life are you seeing clearly, and who are you seeing through someone else's eyes? Because Marcus didn't become distant because he stopped loving me. He became distant because someone he trusted handed him a lens, and he forgot to check whether it was the right one. That can happen to any of us. It's already happening to some of us right now. My foundation, the Dorothy Beaumont Family Foundation, named for my wife, made its first round of grants last spring. housing assistance for working families in Wayne County, literacy programs at 3 community centers on the east side, a scholarship fund at the community college Dorothy taught at for 22 years. None of that is going to make the news. It doesn't need to. It just needs to matter to the people it reaches. I still drive the Silverado, still get my hair cut by Wendell in his basement, still wear the boots, still bank at Meridian Community Trust. Different branch, different teller, but the same institution I've trusted for 2.5 decades. Some things don't need to change just because someone else needed them to. I'd like to ask you something before you go, and I mean this sincerely. Drop a comment and tell me, 1, if you think I handled this the right way, 2, if you think I should have confronted things sooner, or 3, if this story reminded you of something in your own life. I read every comment, every single one, and tell me what city you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I want to know how far this has traveled, because Dorothy always said the truth has long legs. If this story meant something to you, if it gave you something to think about or reminded you of your own worth, consider subscribing. There are more stories like this one, stories about ordinary people who turned out to be anything but. I'll see you in the next one. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Detroit, Michigan, to create original content. Any resemblance to real people, institutions, or events is purely coincidental.